13 children chained in a suburban home. How did no one notice for decades? This is True Crime Unveiled.
The sun had not yet risen over Riverside County, California, when the 911 call came in. It was January 14, 2018, at 5:50 in the morning. The dispatcher answered, expecting a routine emergency. Instead, a young, trembling voice began a conversation that would expose one of the most disturbing residential crime scenes in modern American history. The caller was a 17-year-old girl. She told the dispatcher that she had just climbed out of a window of her own home. She was standing in the dark, holding a deactivated cell phone she had found inside the house, hoping it would still dial emergency services. She told the dispatcher that her 2 teenage sisters were currently chained to their beds.
Wait. She said they were chained to their beds?
She did. She said her parents had chained them up for taking food. The dispatcher asked for her location, but the girl did not know where she was. She did not know her own street name. She had brought a piece of stolen mail with her just so she could read the address aloud. The dispatcher, trying to assess the medical danger, asked if anyone in the house needed medication.
What did she say?
The 17-year-old girl paused and then asked the dispatcher what the word medication meant.
A 17-year-old girl did not know the word medication? Does she have a severe cognitive delay, or was she completely isolated from the world?
It was the latter. And the reality was much darker than a single isolated teenager. The girl on the phone was Jordan Turpin, and she was not an only child. She was one of 13 children trapped inside a house of horrors. Her phone call triggered an investigation that would completely dismantle the facade her parents had built, revealing decades of systematic torture, legal loopholes, and a catastrophic failure of the systems designed to protect the vulnerable. The house on Muir Woods Road in the middle-class suburb of Perris, California, looked perfectly normal from the outside. The lawn was kept. 4 cars sat in the driveway. The blinds were always drawn, but in a quiet commuter town, privacy was not a crime.
How do you hide 13 children in a modern suburban neighborhood without anyone noticing?
By creating an illusion of ordinary eccentricity. The parents, David and Louise Turpin, controlled everything the outside world saw. David was an engineer who had earned a 6-figure salary working for major defense contractors like Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman. He was educated, employed, and legally responsible. Louise was a stay-at-home mother. When the family did leave the house, they presented a bizarre but unified front. Neighbors and extended family occasionally saw photos of the Turpins taking trips to Disneyland or renewing their wedding vows in Las Vegas with an Elvis impersonator. In every photo, the children wore identical matching outfits. They smiled on command. They stood in perfect lines according to their height. It looked strange, but not criminal.
So the public just saw a highly controlled, deeply religious family with too many kids.
Exactly. Extended family members living in other states felt shut out, but whenever they questioned the distance, David and Louise simply cut them off. The system requires probable cause to intervene in a private home, and David Turpin knew exactly how to use the law to create a fortress. The primary tool he used was the California Educational Code.
Wait, how does the Educational Code protect an abuser?
By allowing private homeschools with virtually no oversight. In 2010, David filed paperwork with the state of California to register his home as a private school. He named it the Sandcastle Day School. He listed himself as the principal. Under state law at the time, private schools were not subjected to random inspections by the Department of Education. No state official, no social worker, and no school district representative was required to knock on the door and verify that the students were actually learning, or even healthy.
So as long as the paperwork was filed, the state considered the children accounted for?
Yes, the paperwork provided a legal shield. If a neighbor ever asked why the children were not waiting for a school bus, the answer was simple. They were enrolled in a private day school. But inside the house, there were no textbooks. There was only a rigid, terrifying system of control. Over the course of 2 decades, starting when the family lived in Texas and escalating as they moved through various California towns, the abuse became systematic. The children were forced onto a nocturnal schedule. They were forced to sleep all day and stay awake all night. This ensured they would never make noise during normal daylight hours when neighbors might hear them.
Did the parents sleep during the day too, or was this just a method of isolation?
The parents slept during normal hours, leaving the children isolated in the dark. The rules of the house were designed to break their minds and bodies. The children were allowed to eat only one meal a day, usually consisting of 2 slices of bread with peanut butter or a single slice of bologna. Meanwhile, the parents ate fast food and left freshly baked pies on the kitchen counter, strictly forbidding the children from touching them. The children were allowed to shower only once a year. If they washed their hands above the wrist, they were punished for playing with the water.
Once a year? The physical deterioration from that kind of neglect must be catastrophic. How did they survive?
They survived through absolute submission. The punishments began with physical beatings. Then, David and Louise began locking the children in small animal cages. When the cages were no longer enough, the parents purchased chains and padlocks. For minor infractions, like taking a piece of food or questioning a rule, a child would be chained to their bed frame. Sometimes the chaining lasted for days. Sometimes it lasted for weeks. They were not released to use the bathroom. This was the reality Jordan Turpin had known her entire life.
What finally pushed her to break the rules and escape that morning?
A sudden shift in the timeline. Jordan and her older sister Joy had been secretly planning an escape for 2 years. They had managed to find an old smartphone. It had no service, but they used it when the parents were asleep to connect to the home internet router and look up basic information about the outside world. They watched videos of regular people. They realized their life was not normal. But the trigger came in early January 2018. Louise Turpin announced that the family was packing up and moving to Oklahoma. Jordan knew that if they were moved again, the isolation would deepen. She believed they would not survive another move. So she took the old phone, sneaked into her sister's room, and took photographs of them chained to their beds. Then, she climbed out the window.
She gathered photographic evidence before she left. That shows incredible psychological resilience for someone kept in captivity.
It was the single most important decision of the case. When Riverside County Sheriff Deputy Anthony Collace arrived to meet Jordan that morning, he was initially skeptical. He saw a girl who looked like a small child. She had dirt on her skin. Her speech was stunted. She spoke with a severe impediment and struggled to find basic words. When she told him her older sisters were chained up, the deputy had to verify if this was a delusion or reality. Then, Jordan handed him the phone.
And the photos gave him the probable cause he needed.
Exactly. The photos clearly showed 2 pale, emaciated girls shackled to furniture in a filthy room. Deputy Collace immediately called for backup. A team of officers drove to Muir Woods Road and knocked on the front door. David Turpin answered. He appeared completely normal. He asked the officers how he could help them. When police demanded entry based on the evidence of a crime in progress, the facade collapsed. The officers stepped inside and were immediately hit by an overwhelming stench of human waste, decay, and unwashed bodies. The smell was so thick that several officers had to step back outside to catch their breath.
Did the parents try to stop them from searching the house?
No. Louise Turpin walked into the living room and acted baffled. She asked the officers why they were there, playing the role of a confused, innocent mother. But the police bypassed her and moved down the hallway. Inside the bedrooms, they found the children. 2 of the girls had just been unchained by David right before he opened the door, but the chains and padlocks were still resting on the bed frames. Another child, a 22-year-old, was still shackled to the furniture.
Wait, a 22-year-old? Jordan said her sisters were teenagers.
That was the most shocking discovery of the morning. The police looked at the victims and assumed they were all young children. They were incredibly small, severely malnourished, and spoke with the voices of toddlers. But as the officers began asking for names and dates of birth, the terrifying truth emerged. Of the 13 siblings found in the house, 7 of them were adults. The oldest victim was a 29-year-old woman. She weighed 82 pounds.
An adult woman weighing 82 pounds. The medical starvation must have stunted their physical development entirely.
The forensic medical evaluations confirmed exactly that. When the victims were transported to local hospitals, doctors documented the devastating biological impact of prolonged captivity. The extreme caloric restriction over decades had completely halted their growth. The adults lacked basic muscle mass. Their bone density resembled the elderly. Several of the victims had suffered severe nerve damage from the tight metal chains wrapped around their wrists and ankles. Some of them had never seen a dentist in their entire lives, resulting in profound dental decay. One of the children, an 11-year-old, had arms that were the circumference of an infant.
How do prosecutors build a legal case around this? Because child abuse is obvious, but how do they handle the adult victims?
The Riverside County District Attorney, Mike Hestron, faced a massive and complex legal challenge. He could not just charge David and Louise with child endangerment. He had to account for the adult victims who had been held hostage for over a decade of their adult lives. The prosecutors filed 94 separate felony charges against the parents. These included multiple counts of torture, false imprisonment, child abuse, and a specific California charge called dependent adult abuse.
Is dependent adult abuse usually applied to elder care situations? How does it apply here?
Yes, it is typically used for nursing home neglect or financial exploitation of the elderly. But prosecutors argued that the Turpin adults legally qualified as dependent adults because the parents had intentionally impaired their physical and mental abilities to the point where they could not care for themselves. The adults lacked basic life skills. They did not know how to handle money, they did not understand the concept of a bus, and some did not know what a police officer was until the rescue. The legal argument was that the parents had manufactured their dependency through deliberate starvation and psychological terror.
But what about the torture charges? Because the legal definition of torture usually requires proving a specific malicious intent, right?
Correct. Under California law, proving torture requires showing that the defendant inflicted great bodily injury with the intent to cause cruel or extreme pain and suffering for the purpose of revenge, extortion, persuasion, or a sadistic purpose. Proving a sadistic purpose can be difficult if a defense attorney argues that the parents were simply overwhelmed, mentally ill, or practicing an extreme, albeit misguided, form of religious discipline.
Could the defense actually argue that the parents just did not know how to raise 13 kids and lost control?
They could have tried. The defense could have argued that there was no specific intent to cause pain, only profound neglect. But the prosecution had a piece of evidence that completely dismantled any theory of accidental neglect or religious misunderstanding. They found the journals.
The children kept journals?
Hundreds of them. During their isolation, the children were allowed to write. Investigators recovered hundreds of notebooks from the house. Inside, the victims had meticulously documented their own lives. They wrote about the hunger. They wrote about the beatings. They documented exactly when the chains were used and why. These journals provided a contemporaneous, verified timeline of the abuse going back years. For the prosecution, this was undeniable proof of premeditation. The journals proved that the parents knew exactly what they were doing, that they enforced the rules systematically, and that the suffering was the point.
So the evidence of intent was literally written down by the victims as it happened.
Yes. Faced with an airtight case, the defense strategy shifted entirely to mitigation and delay. David and Louise were held on a $12 million bail each. In separate interrogations, their behaviors contrasted sharply. Louise continued to play the victim, crying and claiming she did not understand why the police took her children. David, however, broke down under pressure. He admitted that the children were chained, but he tried to justify it by claiming it was for their own protection, to keep them from getting into trouble at night.
Did the prosecutors intend to force the 13 siblings to testify in front of a jury?
That was the most critical pressure point of the entire legal process. District Attorney Hestron was deeply concerned about the trauma of a trial. Putting the victims on the stand meant forcing them to face their abusers in open court, subjecting them to cross-examination, and making them recount decades of torture publicly. The prosecution wanted a plea deal, but they demanded the absolute maximum penalty. In February 2019, realizing they could not win against the medical evidence and the journals, David and Louise Turpin pleaded guilty to 14 felony counts, including torture and false imprisonment.
So they surrendered. What was the sentence for pleading guilty to a lifetime of torture?
2 months later, the judge sentenced both David and Louise to 25 years to life in state prison. The judge was unsparing, stating that the parents had stolen the lives, the bodies, and the futures of their own children. The sentence ensured that they would likely die in prison. During the sentencing hearing, 2 of the adult children, including the oldest, spoke in court. They stood before the judge and read their impact statements. They spoke about their lingering nightmares, but they also spoke about their forgiveness, a testament to a psychological survival that the legal system could barely comprehend. But the end of the criminal case was not the end of the tragedy for the Turpin children.
What happened to them after the rescue? Did they finally get the care they needed?
Not immediately. And in some ways, the system failed them a second time. The minor children were placed into the Riverside County foster care system, while the adult dependents were placed under the control of a public guardian. Investigations later revealed that several of the adult children were placed into abusive foster homes, where they faced new forms of neglect and emotional abuse. They struggled to access the hundreds of thousands of dollars in public donations that had been raised for their recovery. The county-appointed guardians failed to provide basic life skills training, leaving some of the adult siblings to face housing insecurity and extreme poverty. It took lawsuits, public outcry, and investigative journalism to force the county to reform its handling of the Turpin siblings.
So they escaped a house of horrors, only to be dropped into a bureaucracy that did not know how to protect them.
Exactly. The true horror of the Turpin case is not just what happened in the dark, it is how easily it happened in plain sight. A father used a simple legal loophole to build a private prison, and for 2 decades, nobody checked on the children. It took the immense courage of a 17-year-old girl who did not even know the word medication to break a generational cycle of captivity. Escaping the house was only their first survival. Learning how to live in a world that had ignored them for so long would become their second. If this case left you questioning the limits of the law and the failure of protective systems, subscribe for more deep investigations into the crimes that redefine our understanding of justice.
And tell us in the comments what you think about the legal loopholes that allowed this to happen for so long. Should the state have the right to inspect private homes claiming to be schools?
If you found value in this breakdown, leaving a like helps support the channel and ensures we can continue pulling the facts out of the shadows. Thank you for listening.
Stay safe and keep questioning everything.